This is the IBJ Podcast for the week of Monday, September 23rd, 2024, brought to you by Taft. I'm your host, Mason King. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. When this podcast posts on September 23rd, the Indiana Fever will be one game into their first round playoff series with the Connecticut Sun. This has been a phenomenally successful year for the Fever on the court and in the box office, in particular with the advent of two major difference makers. One, of course, is all-star rookie Caitlin Clark, and the other is the rapidly advancing technology that the sales and marketing departments use to entertain and retain ticket holders from the Fever's sold-out games in Gainbridge Fieldhouse. Todd Taylor, president of business operations for Pacers Sports and Entertainment, recently spoke with IBJ editor Leslie Weidenbender at our Tech Exec of the Year event, and he shed some light on how the Pacers and Fever are using artificial intelligence and customer data to make meaningful contact with fans, as well as how the teams expect to be able to use those elements in the future. Todd Taylor has agreed to come on the IBJ podcast this week to flesh out some of those ideas even further for using data provided by fans to customize the communication they receive and the deals that they get, sometimes depending on where they are in the fieldhouse or who they're with. Taylor also takes us back to early 2024, as the sales and marketing team began preparing for the very likely possibility that the Fever would draft Clark. It wasn't a foregone conclusion, however, and the department needed to be mindful of other scenarios. Of course, ticket demand eventually exploded, leading to 3 straight weeks of fielding requests for ticket packages. Staffers must remain flexible as the playoffs progress. For example, they won't know whether there will even be a first-round game in Indy until Wednesday night. And the number of employees needed to stage a Fever game at Gainbridge also has dramatically increased. Here's our conversation. It's my pleasure to welcome to the podcast Todd Taylor, president of business operations for Pacers Sports and Entertainment. Thanks for making time to come to the studio today.
Thank you, Mason. Really enjoy being here. Thanks.
Now, your title doesn't do a lot to explain your responsibilities for Pacers Sports and Entertainment. My understanding, for a long time, you have overseen all aspects of PS&E sales and marketing initiatives and have oversight of Pacers gaming and business operations of the Fever and Indiana Mad Ants, which is a developmental team currently located in Fort Wayne. Have I missed anything?
Actually, the only thing is we're actually located here in Indianapolis right now. Fort Wayne, we moved last season, and we'll be eventually in Noblesville with the Mad Ants, or soon to be a new name of a G League team, which will be coming very, very soon. But otherwise, in general, my job is to try and create an environment where our fans come to the game, hopefully have a good enough time at that game or event, and then come back frequently. So sales and marketing is my background. I grew up on the ticket sales side of things, and I've been lucky enough to be able to add some new responsibilities each step of the way.
Okay. Yeah, I think you kind of anticipated my next question is I don't want to assume people know what sales and marketing is, because God knows I don't know what it means. Sales of what and marketing of what?
There's really a few primary revenue streams from a pro sports team. If you think about us, we're really global brands, but we're local businesses. So the revenue streams that I'm really responsible for are ticket sales, sponsorship sales, our retail or merchandise sales, and then sort of helping Levy and our events team with some of the food and beverage opportunities that we have. So basically, it's that first ticket is the main revenue opportunity that teams have. And then from there, there's some ancillary revenue opportunities.
So we're recording this on Thursday, September 19th. The Indiana Fever play their last game, correct, of the regular season tonight.
Correct.
At the Washington Mystics, and then head into the first round of the playoffs. Are they a lock for the 6th seed now?
Yes.
Is that right? Okay. Realizing people will first be able to hear this podcast on Monday, can you tell us what is top of mind for you and your team tonight and then as you prepare for the playoffs?
Well, amazingly, we're not exactly sure who we play yet. So it'll take this last game. Obviously, by Monday, we'll know whether we won our first playoff game or not. It'll be Sunday. And once we know who we're playing, we'll board a plane and get there, begin preparations. And the WNBA is a little bit unique, different than the NBA in the fact that the first round is 3 games. and the first 2 games are at the higher seed. So while we certainly don't want this to happen and hope it doesn't, there's an outside chance that we could not play a home game. In the NBA, you're guaranteed home games. So, this is very much an influx. We're right up to the very end. We don't have all the details, but we certainly know that there'll be a game on Sunday.
Oh, gotcha. So you don't know if there will be a home game.
That's correct. Yeah. So, and it could be the other way. We could go sweep our opponent and
right.
win 2 on the road, right? And then hopefully not come back. That would be the best way not to have a game. But certainly, there's so much excitement around this team right now that it would be a shame if we didn't have that opportunity to really pack Gainbridge Fieldhouse for a Fever home playoff game.
So do you need to be prepared for all the scenarios?
We do, and that's where I'm really lucky. We have an exceptional ticketing team led by Barry Gibson at the top of that, and the logistics team. So they have to be extremely fluid, right? We have to, and it's interesting from a fan standpoint. We put tickets on sale tomorrow, and then that's when people will find out when we have a game, at least tentatively scheduled. They'll buy tickets, and then again, if we sweep our opponent and we don't play that first game, then we immediately have to go into second round. So there's a situation where we could be refunding tickets and immediately putting the next round of tickets on sale. So
wait, so tomorrow dynamic. I'm going to get, because I'm, of course, hooked into all this stuff. Tomorrow I'm going to get an email or a text or both saying, hey, we're in the playoffs. Here's your chance right now to buy a ticket.
Correct.
You might not have a ticket. there may not be a game, right, but this is when you need to buy it.
Exactly. That's when people will buy it, and we'll go ahead and assign those seats. And we will be working on the assumption that we'll have a home playoff game likely on Thursday or Friday of next week. We're still waiting to know that exact date. And then if we don't have a game, we'll make the arrangements to adjust accordingly.
So you're not going to know really until Sunday.
Correct. Yeah. So Sunday,
and then even then, if you sweep them, which is very likely.
Yeah, exactly.
Then you still don't know if you're going to have that game.
No, we really won't until after that second game that we play in the playoffs. So if we win the first game, then we feel highly likely that we would have a home game. But again, we would certainly trade us sweeping on the road and just advancing straight into the second round of playoffs versus having a home playoff game. At this point in the season, winning a championship is certainly what we're striving for. So the quickest way we can do that would be the best.
Is anybody on your team looking even ahead to the second round? Like, do we need to start thinking about who we might face and how that would play out and what we need to do?
Yeah, so the league typically gives you tentative dates that the playoff rounds will begin. So we've already really built out the playoffs the whole way through. So for our season seat holders, for example, when we give them the opportunity to buy their tickets, we provide the entire round of playoffs just like we would be winning a championship. So that makes it easy on our fans. They know that they can guarantee those. Our MVP holders, what we refer to our Fever season seat holders. And basically, we've already planned out the entire playoffs. We just don't know exactly what day of the week they'll be on or what date they'll be on or who will play. So we've got the events, or what we call events, built in Ticketmaster, and then we're ready to kind of flip the switch when we need to.
Okay, so you would actually need to plan ahead to the very end of the playoffs.
Absolutely.
We can't schedule a Foo Fighters concert on what would be the first game of the playoffs.
Yeah, and that's
our first game of the finals.
Absolutely, and that's a whole different area of our business. Marty Bechtold does a good job on our facilities side, our operations side of really a master calendar of the building. So the league, and the same thing happens on the NBA side. They'll let us know dates that we have to hold for future games around the playoffs. So, we already know next summer what holds we would need for the Pacers. And then Marty goes around and books around those holds that we have to try and get the Foo Fighters or any concert like that. So it's a really long process for the dates that we need to hold. And of course, every team goes into the season assuming they're going to be in the playoffs. So that happens across 30 NBA teams and 12 WNBA teams that we're all holding these playoff dates, hopefully to actually get to play in them.
So can you give me just a peek behind the curtain from a sales and marketing perspective from earlier this year, once the Fever knew they had the number one pick in the draft? Because, man, I had a lot of questions back then.
Yeah, it was interesting, and I guess this is good or bad depending on how you look at it. We had the number one overall pick 2 years in a row, so we were able to have the number one pick with Aaliyah Boston, and so we had a pretty good formula down as to what to expect when you get that lucky ping pong ball after an unlucky season, right? So you're going to have the number one pick. It's going to be a great player. It's going to be someone that brings a lot of notoriety with the pick. So certainly from a sales standpoint, the first thing that happens when you get that lucky ping pong ball is, a sales campaign to try and get new season seat holders to come on board. So typically there's a big sales push. What was interesting in the pick that we were able to get Caitlin Clark is we had the number one pick, but we also didn't know if Caitlin Clark would be returning to Iowa for her last year of college.
That's right.
So the ping pong ball was lucky, but we still didn't necessarily know who we would be picking, right?
Yeah, because she had the fifth year.
She did, and she hadn't declared. And typically most athletes do that after their college season completes. So we actually had sort of an interesting run-up. We had the number one pick. There was a lot of speculation and hope that it would be Caitlin Clark coming out, but we're not even able to start talking about who a pick would be from a business standpoint. Obviously, there's a lot of fandom out there, a lot of fan speculation. There's a lot of player speculation, but a team is not technically allowed to start promoting a player that they're going to pick until they actually have picked that player and that player becomes a member of their team. So when Caitlin Clark, she declared for the draft and said that it would be her last year at Iowa, that's actually sort of when all the excitement really started to peak here.
And that was pretty close to the actual draft, right? Did she wait until the end of the season to do that?
No, it was heading into the Big Ten tournament, I believe.
Okay, so you had more.
Yeah, we had a little bit more time. And it was interesting because we didn't know that was going to happen. So obviously social media, she made the post and then, immediately our phones started ringing. So our sales staff, I think they worked 3 straight weeks of fielding inbound interest on ticket packages. Fortunately, and back to the conversation I just had about the playoffs, we have to really anticipate a lot of different scenarios. So we have to build out a lot of different customer journeys or business plans based on what may or may not happen. So the team was ready to go and was able to flip the switch as soon as she declared. And people started to speculate that we would pick the best player available. And that best player was probably going to be Caitlin Clark. I'm on the business side. I know nothing about the team side, but that was definitely a pick that I think people expected us to make.
Is that right? So you didn't know for sure.
Well, yeah.
Like you didn't run into Allison Barber in the hallway and go, who do you think are going to take?
Well, it's there are certain times for sure that, it would almost seem like a slam dunk. I think this was probably that case. But in general, the basketball side, both the Pacers and the Fever, they keep it pretty close to the vest. There's certainly, you don't want to tip your hand. And depending on what pick you have, there's been times in the past with the NBA that a team has had a number one overall pick and there wasn't a clear consensus number one player. So that really determines, if the number one player ends up being you instead of me, that changes the whole draft order when it's, second, third, fourth, and fifth pick. So it's definitely a lot of cloak and dagger on the team side related to the draft.
That's really interesting. So there was a very probable pick, but you couldn't just sort of rest on your laurels once you had already figured out what the campaign was going to be.
Absolutely. And again, I jokingly say I got a whole lot smarter the minute that she declared, right? It's every year, every team, we're trying to sort of do the same things. We're selling tickets and building fandom and sponsorships and getting people to the game and hopefully winning a championship. But what changes every year are the factors that sort of influence how your business operates, right? So you can have a team that wins 10 games and the market's extremely excited because they're on the ramp up. You can have a team that wins 50 games and the market's disappointed because it's the third year in a row they've won 50 games and they just haven't been able to quite get over the hump. So a lot of this is what we call direction of team. And certainly on the Fever side of things, having a team that was already extremely strong, adding a player like Caitlin Clark only made it sort of ramp up the excitement even more. So like I said, I got a little bit smarter right away with that. Our team is always hardworking. I think they're smart and they take great opportunity, the advantage that we have. But it comes down to these key moments in time. And that's when you really have the opportunity to make a lot of sales magic or marketing magic based on either the team performance or getting a generational player.
What kinds of stuff, again, were you preparing from the sales and marketing perspective leading up to the draft? What kinds of materials, what kinds of campaigns would you be working on?
We go into every year really talking about, how do we think this season will play out? Our marketing team, Shayna Sangster, runs the marketing for the Fever. She'll go meet with Lynn Dunn on the basketball side of things and really talk about the makeup of the team or coach sides. What can we expect from a style of play? Certainly, it's a lot different than when I started this business. With social media now, there's so much transparency and each of the players have their own brand. The traditional marketing campaign doesn't really exist like it used to, where you'd have a nice little tagline and then you'd try and build your business around it. A lot of it is based on how we think the season is going to go from a team performance or from a style of play and effort. And then we build our marketing campaigns around that. So, heading into this year was Fever Rising. And the reason for that was really, it was a team on the rise, right? We had a lot of years when Tamika Catchings retired that we struggled a bit. But again, like I said, fortunately or unfortunately, team performance put us in a spot where we had high draft picks. We've really been building the depth of the Fever. And then the whole goal is to have a young team that grows together. So Fever Rising was the campaign. We had those collateral materials. We obviously couldn't use any player images of players we didn't have. So early on in the campaign, it was a lot of Aaliyah Boston and Kelsey Mitchell and Alyssa Smith on the collateral. But we were also preparing to use Caitlin Clark image when we had the opportunity. So we were able to work with Iowa a little bit and get some of the stock footage there. And then with the magic of our ability to basically have Caitlin Clark join the existing players at the first opportunity we had, we were able to add her into the collateral. And then on the sales side, it's pricing and packaging. So when you strip away all the coolness of sports, it's a normal functioning business. It's supply and demand, and it's pricing, what's available for the consumers. Do you put it in a package that is reasonable and usable for them? We try not to introduce new products that cannibalize the previous product. And in a market like ours, retention is what wins. So we make sure that anything that we introduce new, we're still taking care of our existing seat holders. So when you go back to that magic ping pong ball and drafting Caitlin Clark, we have a big group of season seat holders that have been with us for the existence of the franchise. So, it's really making sure that they still feel loved and taken care of as we have all this new interest, right? And then the final piece of it really is anticipating how much you can sell, right? So years past, we wouldn't have opened the balcony very often unless it was a championship game or a finals. In this particular case, we really sold the middle of the bowl down, and then we were prepared to open the balcony based on demand. And, fortunately, that demand was there.
Did you have any sort of sense that you'd be able to sell out even after you drafted Caitlin?
It was interesting. Like I said, we had to prepare for that scenario. But, I've been in sports for over 25 years. Ticketing is my background. I already mentioned Barry Gibson on this podcast. And, Barry, his background is ticketing. And there were times that we had conversations and we'd talk strategy. And I'm like, there's no way this can continue on. And then there'd be conversations like we should play in a bigger building.
How much did ticket prices go up compared to the previous season?
Wow, it'd be hard for me to say. We have 56 different price zones on the Fever. So
what is a price zone?
So when I started in sports, and when I got here in 2011 with the Pacers, we had 8 different what we would call price neighborhoods, right? So the center 3 sections, for example, along the court, that would be section E, right? So we had 8 different price zones and we had 4 different products: a full season, a half season, a group, and a single game. And that was it. Now we actually have 56 different zones. So in that first example I gave, we had a center 3 section. We might have 9 different price zones within that. And that comes down to just, as I said, when you strip away the coolness, it's a functioning business, right? It's supply and demand, and it's pricing integrity, and it's valuation of each one of those. If you think about a neighborhood, right? Like, you walk into a neighborhood, there's one house is one price, and depending on if you're close to the clubhouse or close to the tennis courts, then your price changes. So sports is the exact same way. I will say the prices went up fairly dramatically in the spots that are in high demand. So courtside, for example, last year we had 2 rows of courtside seats, courtside being right on the floor. This year we have 5. So not only did demand increase, but so did price. And that's always an interesting conversation, right? And I think as we look at pricing, and again, the moment in time for women's professional sports, people definitely want women's sports to be elevated. And what comes along with that is, right, real value. People are buying these tickets and they're coming to these games. It is no longer we're buying tickets because we want to support women's sports. We're buying tickets because women's sports are exciting. They're fun. We want to be there. That crowd is incredible. I think you mentioned you went to Sunday's game, right? Like it's like playoff atmosphere. And when you create that environment, and that starts with the players, then there has to be appropriate pricing to that. And if we want to lift this league and grow this league, then obviously the revenue streams have to be there. And then that will help build this business even more.
We have a staffer here at IBJ whose son has courtside seats and has had them for years. So, and I don't know anything about what he pays for those seats. It struck me as an interesting example in that, you want to reward him for being a loyal courtside seat holder. And so, you don't want to price him out of it or necessarily.
Correct.
You want to keep that relationship, but at the same time, suddenly that real estate is worth a lot. So,
Absolutely.
I mean, that's got to be an interesting conversation to have inside how to price that.
Yeah, it is. And that's, again, we have really, really smart analysts, Patrick and Lucas, they do an amazing job of really trying to look at pricing within both the Pacers and Fever and say, what would the free market get for this, right? And what's interesting is when I started this in this business a long time ago, there were these terrible people out there called scalpers, right? And we tried to keep the scalpers away. And then they evolved into brokers. And now, interestingly enough, we sort of look at them as wholesalers. I worked in baseball when StubHub formed the first deal with a major league. It was interesting because it really changed the dynamics. Like the secondary market it is not something in the shadows anymore. People can buy tickets for any game. And it also gives us better insight to what is the true value of a ticket, right? When we price tickets at the beginning of the year, we're basing it. It's a little bit like stocks, right? Like it's an IPO. We don't exactly know what the year is going to be. We have these great forecasts, but we don't exactly know how it's going to work. As you start to get into the year, you know how the stock's performing, right? Are we trending in the right direction or the wrong direction? So the secondary market allows us to really get more data to know exactly what the tickets are going for, right? Like we price them at one. Is there a markup and a margin? Did we leave money on the table, so to speak, or did we overprice something?
Is there like dynamic pricing by any chance? Like, for example, like at the beginning of the season, you've got like a single seat up towards the back of the stadium, maybe is, I don't know, $25. And then middle of the season, you're like, whoa.
Yes.
The market is asking for a lot more than this.
Yeah, absolutely. There's dynamic pricing, and the Cardinals, I think in Major League Baseball, one of the first teams to do that, over a decade ago. And it was interesting because sports teams were really nervous to go down that. Where we get a lot of comparison is airlines, right? And that's not always a great comparison.
Yeah.
People
don't think you want to be in that
exactly. But in terms of pricing, right? So, you buy at a certain point in time, and you and I are both going to Boston. We might be able to pay wildly different prices for seats that are right next to each other. In sports, for a long time, we were really hesitant to do that, right? Same thing with season seat holders. When we sell a season ticket plan for the Fever, next year it's going to be 22 games. So we priced that for all 22
is that right?
games.
They're going to 44?
Yep, going to 44. So,
wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yep, added a couple games for next year. Yeah. So when we price that, we price it out for the entire season. And that sets our baseline. And then again, we think every game is fun and equally exciting to be at. But the reality is, games fall on different days of the week at different times of the year, right? So we call them sleep-in games. We don't have to take your kid and wake them up in the morning for school. It's easier for you to come to a game. So nights before holidays, Friday night, Saturday night, easier for families to come out. It's a little tougher on a Tuesday. So when you look at opponent and day of the week and time of year, there's a natural number one highest demanded game, and there's going to be a number 22 demand game, right? No matter how you look at it. So those values of those games are not the same. And for a long time, teams didn't change the pricing structure. But now with mobile ticketing and the tools that we have, we're able to better adjust it. And what that means is it allows our fans opportunities to be able to go to a wider range of games. So if you want to go to the absolute best game and you're going to go to one game and you're going to spend all your vacation money to do it, you can certainly do that as a consumer. If you want to be able to go to a handful of games and you want to sit closer to the court, there's also at the other end of that spectrum the opportunity to do it. So it allows us to be able to price our tickets to get a wider range of fans in there rather than a sit it and forget it.
Did you need to increase the size of your sales and marketing team to handle the kind of demand? I mean, I don't know much about math, but you're maybe like 4,000 to 5,000 a game for the Fever last season, and now you're up about 18 a game. Is there a corresponding increase in the kind of staff you need to have, or
definitely
something different?
And that's where a company, or I'm very fortunate to be at Pacer Sports Entertainment because we have two teams, so we're able to flex our sales reps across both organizations. So the Fever have a dedicated sales and service team, but when we get that big flood of calls over that 3-week period of time, we didn't have to take weeks to call people back, right? We could just shift the Pacers staff over to help supplement the Fever staff, and we could get through our customers quicker. And that's where the team and some of it's, how you compensate and how you create a team environment, everybody really jumped in for the success of the franchise. So we're able to flex. But to your question specifically, yes, our sales staff dramatically increased on the Fever side. Historically, we had 3 or 4 reps, and they were really focused more on just building the season ticket base and maintaining what we had. Now with the Fever, Ashley Chitwood, she's our head of sales on the Fever side of things. She's done a great job of developing a Fever-specific group of sales reps, both in season ticket plans. So that's obviously all the calls that were coming in. We had this opportunity to build our base dramatically. But as I mentioned before, retention is critical. So we have a team that focuses just on keeping people happy and keeping them coming back. And then we were able to build out a group sales team. So we have those balcony seats that we didn't have before. So it allows a group of people to be able to come to a game together and experience that. So the sales staff probably went from 4 to 12 on the Fever side of things. And it will evolve now because, we've sold so many season ticket plans that we won't be offering season tickets in the mid and lower bowl. So now it's about retention. So the people that are in and want to keep those, we want to make sure that they do that. And we'll start to try and sell season tickets in the balcony and group packages. So the focus will shift from that team, but we'll still need the bodies.
How big is your staff? You have such a big title now, though.
It's exactly.
You define your staff.
Pacers Sports Entertainment is about 400 or so employees now. And I think on the sales and marketing side of things, we'd be about 50% of that or so.
Oh, wow. Quite a bit.
Yeah. So in sales and marketing, it's big because it's, multi-property. As mentioned, the G League team, the Fever, the Mad Ants, Pacers, so the Pacers Gaming, and then the building. So when you think about social media, we have a social media group that's pretty large that covers all that content. From your world now, that's kind of a big growing area, and there's no shortage of content opportunities, especially when you have, players on both teams, and they're busy 365 days a year. So analytics has been a big growth opportunity. Sales is certainly the biggest area that we have. So it takes a lot of people. I didn't even know before I got in sports that there was really a sports business. You think what happens on the court is sort of it, and amazingly enough, even with the number of people that I just mentioned, to put on a game, you still need several hundred more people that are ushers, ticket takers, parking attendants, concession, because those are really the group of people that make the game experience meaningful and hopefully fun and keep people coming back.
How many people does it take on game day to run the operation?
Yeah, so I think we're north of 600 when you really look at it just from a support running every area of the business. So it's a huge undertaking for sure. But again, as I said, in a market like ours, we would need to make sure that the people that come to a game have a really, really good time at the game. And we can't always guarantee a win, but we can make sure that when you're scanning your ticket, the person that's doing that has a smile on their face, or necessary things like going through security, right? We try and make those as painless as possible. So you need more points of contact. The bigger the crowd goes, the more people you need to make sure that the building's staying clean and the fans are having a really good night.
So for Fever games last year, maybe you needed significantly less people?
Left, yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And now you're at the 600.
It's interesting because the Pacers and the Fever really operate very, very similar now, right? So before there used to sort of be a drop-off between the two franchises, right? The Pacers typically had higher crowds. So when we had games for Pacers, it looked a certain way, so you had to budget a certain way. What's been really helpful this year is the Fever and the Pacers really are very similar. So if you take away it's Fever and Pacers, we really just look at it as we're at 60 plus games a year. They're all the same, different crowds for sure, but the way we operate, it makes it great because we just get really, really good at making sure we get people through the turnstiles and to the bathrooms and to the concession stands and to their seats and do it in a happy way.
Gainbridge is so interesting to me. It's sort of like an extra dimensional place. Like depending on where you're sitting, it is a very different place. Like on Sunday, we were kind of up towards the back in one of the corners. And that felt different from when, we're in the middle of the club seat level where place feels like the Grand Canyon. Is huge. I mean, it's almost like being in Lucas Oil. So it feels. And then one time, in a previous season, I was able to sit really close to the floor, and it felt very intimate. And it felt like, boy, those are all just different experiences. I don't know if you guys really think in terms of how each person in each area sees the game.
We try to, and we certainly want to make the experience best. It's, I've talked about it quite a bit. It's really mass customization, right? And what's interesting is you just touched on something that we really focus a lot on. People that are sports fans, when I was home early in my career in the summer, someone said, man, you work in sports and you sell tickets. What do you do in the summer? And I'd worked at hockey. And I'm like, well, it's a year-round thing, right? People that are sports fans just assume that people show up to our games. in reality, you just mentioned one of the biggest challenge and opportunities we have, and that's our fans they're multidimensional. So depending on who you come to the game with and where you sit, your experience changes. So I just mentioned my college roommate. That experience was much, much different if you and I were going to a game as business colleagues, or if I'm taking someone on my staff as a reward for a job well done, or I'm trying to take someone to close business. Each time I'm there, I'm a different consumer. And then based on where I sit, it's a different experience. So we've really tried to look at it and say, okay, if you're going to be upstairs, for example, and you're going to be in the balcony, how can we make that the best possible experience? Some people just love being that high up because they watch the plays develop. Some people are up there because it's a price point issue. Some people are up there because it's a high demand game and they just can't miss it. So that's why they've got that massive scoreboard, hanging over that court, right? It's if you look around, I think the biggest investment we've really made is the LED screens. We just added a new 360-degree ribbon board around the top fascia. You've got 3 new massive TV screens or LED screens in each end of the seating bowl upstairs, and then you've got that center hung scoreboard. So even if you're upstairs, I think that you can still feel pretty close to the action. And then to your point, I think one of the coolest things to be able to do is to move someone down close to the court. I think all the players are so big that when you look at them, they don't seem big. And then when you sit close to the court, you realize how big and athletic they are. You realize, whether it's the Fever or the Pacers, how physical the game is. You really start to take an even better appreciation for the athletic ability and just sort of the interaction. And, sometimes you get to hear some choice words and, it's a good experience for everybody. But, I don't think that there's I think people talk about glass seats in hockey, but I certainly don't think being around the court, there's probably a more unique experience.
Let's take a quick break so we can hear from our sponsor. This is the IBJ Podcast.
Taft, today's modern law firm. With more than 800 attorneys in 8 primary Midwest markets and the District of Columbia, we provide solutions to the business issues facing middle market and emerging companies alike. We do this through a highly collaborative and inclusive team approach. Taft, the modern law firm. To learn more, visit taftlaw.com.
All right, we're back with this week's edition of the IBJ Podcast and my conversation with Todd Taylor of Pacers Sports and Entertainment about how the organization is harnessing the power of both Caitlin Clark and new technology on the sales and marketing side. This kind of brings us to the reason why we scheduled this interview in the first place, which is technology. You could say that the other game-changing newcomer this year has been like the rapid development of data analytics and artificial intelligence, an explosion of ways that you guys can use them. And when you appeared as a speaker at IBJ's recent Tech Executive of the Year program, you said you think of technology as 3 different buckets when it comes to Pacer Sports and Entertainment. What are those buckets?
The first bucket is the venue itself. From a fan accessibility and a fan experience standpoint, how do we provide an experience that you can't get at home, right? I mean, the television viewing experience is awesome. Screens at home are massive. And how do we make being at Gainbridge Fieldhouse unique and different? So that's where, a lot of it is infrastructure and network. It's the ability for you to send a video out to your family and friends or a photo. How do you still accessible on your mobile devices? How do we speed you through as quick as possible through security and our tickets, through our scanning transactions? Those are all things that we look at that really will determine a fan experience. How do we improve each one of those? So that's the first thing. It's the video boards, the sound system, it's the Wi-Fi infrastructure, point of sale. That's the first bucket. The second bucket is really fan experience in venue. And that is, if we're going to invest in all that technology, how do we make it actionable and usable? So we have a great deal with Salesforce, tower in the backyard. So they're very, very helpful. In a market like ours, we're typically not going to find a group of people that are huge basketball fans that didn't know the Pacers and Fever existed, right? So the key to our success is, how do we encourage someone to come to one more game? How do we incentivize them to buy one more hot dog, or how do they buy one more hat or jersey? And that's where that data that you just mentioned being actionable is really important. How do we build these profiles? And when you build profiles and use data, there's always different levels of comfort, right, as a consumer, right? As an individual consumer, I grew up in the era where you still shredded your duplicate checks when they came back from the bank, right? And you never gave anybody your personal information. I have 3 kids, 23, 21, and 17, and they'll give out personal information pretty readily if it enhances their overall experience or it gives them access to something that they want. So the real key for us in that fan experience is, how do we continue to be able to customize that visit to Gainbridge Fieldhouse and make it as optimized as possible by utilizing that data? And how do we enhance that fan experience and earn the trust of our fans to be able to acquire that data so that we can actually make each game completely memorable? And then the key to that really is, how do we make it real time and make it happen on the spot, right? So it's easy enough for me to send you a, Mason, thanks for coming to the game. Come back next Friday for our next home game after the fact, right? But where we eventually want to get to is while you're in venue, and if you're considering that purchase, how do we make that moment? Or how do we learn enough about you that every game you go to get Dippin' Dots, right? So how do we reward your Dippin' Dot habit so that makes your connection stronger to us? How do we do that real time? It's one thing to send the coupon for the next time you're there, but if you're like me, you forget the coupon existed, or you forget to use it, or it's less meaningful. If it's at the spot and it's like, hey, you're standing in front of Dippin' Dots, let's go ahead and give it to you for 50% off, then that helps that enhancement. That's the second bucket. Third bucket is really, how do we take that memory and how do we take that and let you take it home with you? So it's interesting being a ticket guy. Tickets are a huge part of my background. I have a whole box full of great events that I've gone to, and I think mobile ticketing has been awesome for a data capture and just ease of transferring tickets between friends. But you don't have that physical keepsake. So, our deal with Spoke Note, they're our uniform patch partner on the Pacer side of things. We've developed new products that actually allow fans to take a physical item and basically take a digital media and attach it to that physical item through a QR-like code. So that means when you take home a commemorative ticket from a game that you've attended, you're typically not doing that to prove that you went to the game, right? You're doing that when you look at it, you remember it was your third grade son that you went to the game with. And what's even better is when you can take your phone, click on that code, and a picture pops up of you and your son, so that 10 years from now, when they're not a third grader anymore, you don't have to imagine what they look like, or you don't have to go back and look in your phone. You can just hit that QR code, and then there's that picture in that moment. Okay. So it's those things that really take that experience, and so many of life's moments are imprinted around sports, right? If you're a sports fan, or even outside of sports, if it's just a vacation or someplace, a restaurant you went where you got engaged, right? Those are things that are imprinted. And if you can keep that digital memory with that physical keepsake, then I think that we're really onto something.
Now, when I think about data, I always think about, well, how am I entwined with my smartphone? How do you make sure everybody in Gainbridge who has a smartphone can interact with social media and send pictures and photos very quickly? Because, in a way, our lives are now lived through that device.
Completely. And it's been interesting over the years. There's been a lot of debate about, mobile devices. And you have some teams where, you want to create so much excitement that people don't look at their phones. And then they realize that that's almost impossible, right? It's like, it's so habitual now. So now it's, how do you make the mobile device part of the overall experience? Several years ago, we worked with a company to do augmented reality, and we had a Boomer Dunk Challenge, and you would use your smartphone to interact with the scoreboard to unlock a marker that allowed you to do a slingshot game where Boomer dunked on a basket.
Wait, really?
Yeah, and I know, it's crazy. And we do a lot of things like trivia, or you have a lot of interaction with the mobile devices with our center hung scoreboard. And then, I mentioned it earlier, Carl Cirasoli, who I think was a Tech Executive of the Year winner, I think previously through the IBJ. He's done an amazing job, him and his team, of really creating the environment that allows 17,000 people to utilize Wi-Fi and be able to communicate either internally or externally. So photos, you mentioned that, we promote in game that, hey, if you want to be on the scoreboard, which when we do all of our surveys, the things that people really, really love is a free t-shirt thrown into the crowd, or their face being up there on the center hung scoreboard. So we've actually done some things with some filters on Snapchat. We've also done the ability for you to use your phone to put yourself on the center hung scoreboard. So you can go through basically our customer flow, and then we can pick your feed. And so it's you and I there. We're doing a sort of a selfie cam, and we would be up on the scoreboard. So it's all those things to use that technology to have people immersed in the game, but also be able to share the experience of the game. Because again, that grapevine networking, if you go all the way back to the beginning of marketing, it was really word of mouth, right? Newspaper on your door and you missed this great event. Well, now we have the ability to have each consumer there either positively or negatively create a review of what a game is like there. So our goal is to try and make as many people as possible sort of raving fans and then maybe unsuspecting salespeople for us, right? Because if you go to a game and you're at a sports bar and you're talking about how awesome it was, you really got to go. That's a whole lot different than me being there, being paid by Pacer Sports Entertainment to tell how great the experience is, right? So you have a whole lot more credibility than I do, and that's what we really try and drive.
So you need to make sure that the building has capacity for 18,000 people to be streaming videos at the same time. I mean, that's a lot of capacity.
It is. And then we also still have to be able to run all of our own stuff at the same time, right? So, if you think about the number of cameras that we have and the video boards and IPTV, and it's amazing. It's almost, and I'm involved in it every day, but the team that we have, Emily Wright in our studio, and Dean Haviland running our game experience, there's a lot of need in terms of data and streaming and cameras and coordination, in addition to also making sure that you as a consumer, when you come to a game, you can still text back at home, make sure that everything's fine at home, or check your fantasy football score, or whatever the case may be.
And you want me to post stuff on social media?
Absolutely. Well, I want you to post positive stuff on social media.
Right. Sorry. Why would there be negative stuff? I don't even know why that would be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because I'm doing your marketing for you.
100%. Like I said before, you're more credible. You really have nothing to gain or lose from it, right? Like, and I jokingly say this all the time, when I go speak to a Rotary Club and I'm talking about how awesome the Pacers and Fever are, well, I would hope so, right? Because I'm getting paid by an organization to go out and promote it. But if you get up there and you offer a testimonial not tied to us at all and say, man, I tell you what, there's no better experience than a Fever game, your words carry a whole lot more weight than mine. So, when we look at our marketing, certainly people get caught up in flyers and images and social media posts, but I think the real marketing gold is happy fans or attendees at Gainbridge Fieldhouse to go ahead and have a positive review and ask their friends to come and be a part of it.
I wanted to ask you about artificial intelligence because everybody's confused about it. What does that mean to you guys right now? How do you use it and how do you want to be able to use it?
The way we use it now, and I mentioned Salesforce, certainly with our relationship with them, it's an area that they're focused on. So we get to pilot a lot of nice things. It really, and when I spoke to Leslie a couple years back, I think about artificial intelligence, one of the things we were using was, email optimization and when we deliver email. So trying to make that as custom as possible. If you have a different favorite player than I do, making sure the right player is on your image when you get it in your inbox. But also, do you check your email first thing in the morning or last thing when you go to bed? So delivering our message to the time that it's not buried in your inbox, that was sort of the first wave of artificial intelligence.
They can do that?
Yeah.
It knows when I'm probably most likely to check my email.
You can make a recommendation on when we would deliver emails to our customers based on when they're opening it or when they engage with it.
How does it know who my favorite player is?
So we do the favorite player. We do a lot of surveying. So what we would do is we would, ask you, right? So when you engage with us, and that's why I go back to that retention's important. So if you're a season seat holder, we're trying to get information or have a better relationship with you by knowing what's important to you. So if Reggie Miller's your favorite Pacer of all time and Tyrese Halliburton is our point guard right now and an all-star, probably tapping into your old memory of Reggie Miller
Nostalgia
is probably a really good move for us, even though you're a big Tyrese fan, right? So, and again, it's only a shortage of time and effort, right? We could have unlimited content creation eventually, and you ask where we want to go with AI. It's really, I think, in a couple spaces. It's one, it's making sure that we're delivering the content that you're looking for that's custom directly to you, and whether that is just to build fandom or if it's for retail, then certainly want that to happen. The other thing is, I touched on it earlier, it's the ability to interact with our fans in real time. So if you're at a game, how do we enhance your experience by recommendations in real time? And you can't do that with 18,000 people. I could never have a big enough staff that would be sort of monitoring your travel across Gainbridge and know where you are in the building and run up to you and say, hey, this is your Dippin' Dots, right? They're 50%, they're right here.
So wait, this is possible, potentially is possible.
Yep.
That I'm walking through the concourse and the Steak and Shake place is there. And then it will know I am approaching the Steak and Shake counter and go, hey, $2 off on whatever they sell there.
Burgers, maybe. That's where we want to go. Yeah, that's where the next version of it. And again, it's interesting, right? Because there's so much about AI and what it can do and the good and the bad. And I think for our standpoint, we really want to try and find ways that make it immediate and actionable, that you don't have to have a lot of human interaction to be able to make a recommendation, because you and I might be standing right next to that steak and shake milkshake bar, and I might love chicken sandwiches and they're right across there at Chick-fil-A. So knowing that I'm getting a Chick-fil-A offer and you're getting a milkshake offer, that makes a whole lot more sense than us both just getting a milkshake offer.
But it will know where I am in the building.
We would have the ability if you give us the permission to do so. So that's where it would eventually go. Yeah. And again, the holy grail, like where I would love at some point, and Dean Haviland and I, he's our game entertainment VP, we've talked about like a smart building, right? So we tend to play music that's from our own era, or we have our young staff tell us what's kind of cool, but knowing the makeup of the crowd might determine what songs you play, right? Like, should we be playing Thunderstruck in the fourth quarter in a tight game when almost no one in the building knows what Thunderstruck is, right? Like, so instead, if there's a modern version of it, we can use Spotify data, and you're giving us access to know what's in your playlist. If we found out that 85% of the people in the game have one favorite song, then again, it would make sense for us to
How
play
explicit is that permission?
We're extremely conservative in terms of legal, and I mean that in a very good way. I think that the biggest thing whenever there is a new, and sports is jokingly say it's a little bit of a lemming industry because we're not competitors. So if there's one good idea at a team, every team adopts it and every team willingly shares it. So I think that we've really taken a more measured approach. There's so much now that has a data component, but we make sure that we protect that data. Like at the end of the day, we don't gain a whole lot by sharing your data with anybody else. Really, the value for us on that data is making sure that we can customize your own experience. So the permission-based, if someone doesn't want us to use their data, we don't want to use that data because it doesn't help us.
Is there at some point, though, where like I have to check a box and say, yes, you can...
Yeah. Absolutely.
dig around in my phone and find out what I'm interested in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or check my feeds.
Yeah, we're all very, very clear about that. So when you go, for example, with our email, we make it pretty easy for you to pick and choose what you want. I mean, if you want to get everything that we send, I mean, you're getting an awful lot in one day, right? You got player content, you've got retail content, you've got merchandise, you've got game promotion. You got a lot going on potentially. So if you only want to get the game night preview, then we only want to send you the game night preview because you get all that rest of that stuff, you're blocking us on everything.
Exactly. I'm literally like checking my phone right now because I know I got something from you earlier today.
Probably
related to the game. When I enter the stadium, do you know that my phone is there?
We would not know that your phone is there. When you scan your tickets, we would know that you are there.
And I am there.
Correct.
Okay. Because you know that I bought those tickets.
Correct.
And then you know whatever I've said that you can know about me.
Correct. So in that particular case, let's say you and I are going to go to the game together. There's really two ways that I get in there. I either walk in with you and you've got both tickets on your phone, or I'm running late and you transfer the ticket to me. So if you transfer the ticket to me, then I know that ticket in Todd Taylor's account was received from Mason, right? So we can track those two back together, and I would know when Todd Taylor shows up and I would know when Mason King shows up. And again, depending on the level of permission, and again, this is, you ask where we're going, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
A lot of this is not for today, but eventually where we would see that going is if Todd Taylor's given permission and given a lot of knowledge on what I expect that game to be, then the AI should be able to predict how to optimize that experience based on individual preference.
You mentioned before about there are different ways that you can look at me as a consumer, depending on the context of my visit. I could be with my son, I could be with my wife, I could be with a coworker, I could be with a college buddy. Why are those distinctions relevant, and how does that change what you're trying to give me?
The best example that I can give, and for any marketers out there, especially that have been classically trained, we tend to try and do lookalike campaigns. So as soon as you find out who buys your product, you start to do this background and see, what commonalities are across all your customers. So if it's a luxury car, do they also go to a country club? What magazines do they subscribe to? What zip codes do they live in? Sports, you can't quite build profiles that cleanly, right? Because you may have a super fan that is spending every dime of disposable income to sit in a seat that is 20 rows from the court, dead center, right next to a CEO of a company, doesn't really care about basketball, but knows it's a great entertainment venue for their clients, right? So they're motivated by two different things, even though they're sitting right next to each other. So what profile do you buy, right? Do you buy the profile of the super fan or do you buy the profile of the CEO? So what's important for us to know is that when you're at those games, you're there because it's a communal event. The role that you play within that or your own sort of personal experience changes based on who you're with. So it was just funny that my college roommate was here, but I've jokingly said in the past, right? Like my college roommate shows up, I'm now in my 50s. We probably drink one too many beers and I feel terrible for 3 days, right? But if I'm taking my daughter who's home from college, then I'm going to make sure that we're going to go and back to Dippin' Dots, right? I might go to Dippin' Dots because I remember as a little girl, she used to love that, right? Or now she's old enough to be 21, it might be her first drink. So those memories that are made are different based on who you're with and what type of experience you want to create. So if I'm trying to close a business deal with you, then I might take you to a different spot in the building than I would normally. So I might just go get a Ben's pretzel. When it's just me, I may want you to try Ben's pretzels, but I'm also going to want to make sure that you go to one of those clubs because I want you to have that experience. So the individual consumer being motivated by different things, it's important for us to know that because if we're not delivering the right experience for you as that consumer, you're not likely to come back.
How do you know I am with my wife as opposed to my son?
It depends on who the customer is, right? And again, where we're trying to eventually go with this is the permission you would give. So in a perfect world, we would love to get, and during All-Star, we did this, we had a playbook, right? And we basically allowed people to pick their journey based on who they were coming with. So if I'm looking for free events with my kids, I could go into the playbook and I could click and it would pull up all of the information that was there. So we would love to get to the point where there's a recommendation engine, right? Think about it that way. So yes, I'm coming to the game with my wife, click, right? And the more times you click who you're with, we would be able to build a better profile of what do you do when you're there with your wife? Where do you stop? Like, do you always go to the team store? Do you always split a pretzel? Do you not buy anything because she's a hardcore basketball fan and doesn't want to miss one moment of action? It's eventually there being able to make that data actionable, but it starts with, do the fans or customers want to provide that? Again, as like I said, at the beginning, it doesn't make any sense to have that information if the fan doesn't want that information to be used, right? That's a big turnoff, and that actually hurts our business more than anything. So a lot of these things are more forward and future thinking. And again, that all starts with earning the trust of the fan and the customer. And the more trust we can build, the better we can create that experience.
How big is your content creation staff?
Gosh, it's the fastest growing group that we have, probably around 30 people now.
And then how has that grown over the last few years?
So when I first got here, our digital marketing was basically the person that knew most about email.
And that was about 13 years ago?
Yeah, exactly. And since then, we've grew from 1 to 2 and 2 to 4. And I think, during COVID, like every company, we had to make some difficult decisions and had to reduce staff in certain areas. There were 2 spaces that we didn't touch. One was our analytics, our data, which was that Salesforce relationship, building those profiles. The second was our digital media team, because that's how we connect with our fans, and sometimes that's a retail message. Sometimes that's just brand building. Sometimes it's just fan engagement. So, it's certainly an area that's not slowing down by any stretch, especially, again, as we know more about our fans. What might be interesting to you might not be interesting to me. So we're now creating 2 different content streams, one that appeals to you and one that appeals to me. And if you think about how fractionalized that could be, there's almost no end in sight. So again, that's where AI could become very helpful someday, kind of being able to parse that out and deliver it.
So it's not just scenes from games or scenes from players arriving or players in the locker room. It's also collaterals that we're like, hey, we had caps on sale today. So you guys have to watch social media really carefully to find out all the different platforms that are developing like in real time and different ways of spreading content in real time. Like, suddenly Facebook has something very similar to Vines, or that's something really similar to Reels. And then you got to put somebody on that and go, okay, we need like a bunch of like 10-second content.
Yeah, it's when I first started in this business, I'd say I was lucky because I was able to make it through when you could still be a generalist. But really, these are very complex, sophisticated businesses now. And I love my role because I get to work with experts. So what you touched on is one of the big challenges that we have. How do you stay ahead of the trends in technology? How do you understand how to best create something for a specific platform? And that's where we're really lucky, because so much of our business is built on young people coming out of college or people that are understanding the trends. And I think from a leadership standpoint, we just need to sort of stay out of the way sometimes, right? Like, I'll never be a social media expert to the level of someone that's, 24 years old that has grown up with it. So we really rely on our staff to make those recommendations. And then, I've been fascinated, one piece of content in my mind growing up in the videotape era, right? It's like there's only really one or two different media outlets or distribution channels. Here, you can have one piece of content that needs to be formatted several different times to make it more appealing for each one of the platforms that's utilized, or the closed captioning on the video because people are watching it without the sound on. Like, it blows your mind, all the things that you have to think about just to make it really the most accessible to our fans. So they do an amazing job. I don't know how they stay on top of it, but fortunately they do.
Well, you were pretending before we started this interview that you're not busy today, but I know you are, so I'm going to let you go. But thanks so much for blowing my mind on all this stuff. This is just a lot and so newsy, as we say in the business, with the fever headed for the playoffs. So best of luck to you guys. You're going to have your hands full.
Thank you. And thanks again for having me on. I mean, we're very proud of what we've been able to build. And it's so important, I think, for the community, but also the fans, and to have the opportunity to be able to share some of the insight with you. I really appreciate it.
My thanks again to Todd Taylor. And folks, before you get on with the rest of your week, there are a few stories in the latest print edition of IBJ I want to draw to your attention. First up, more than 5 months after the Indiana Fever drafted Caitlin Clark at number 1 overall in the WNBA draft, Central Indiana sports and tourism leaders are eager to further grow the women's sports ecosystem. Mickey Shuey reports on 2 teams that will begin play next year, one a professional volleyball franchise and the other a semi-pro tackle football team. Also in this week's issue, Dave Lindquist sheds light on the Micro Museum, aiming to preserve the cultural history of the Martindale-Brightwood neighborhood. And Susan Orr explores how tech companies are still grappling with the value of remote work versus in-office policies. And again, you can find these stories in the latest print edition of IBJ or online at ibj.com. And I will say it is quite a bit easier to access all of the latest business news and all of IBJ's data on Central Indiana's business community and economy if you're a subscriber. We're running a promotion right now that gives you complete access for $1 per week for 3 months, just to get a sense of how valuable and original our content is. Just go to ibj.com and click on the subscribe button. And thanks again for making time this week for the IBJ Podcast. I'm Mason King. Hang in there, everybody. We'll be back again next week.